Well, busy lives can sure narrow our time, and they can narrow our perspective. Language and culture open vistas to hear the sounds that others hear, see the sights that surround them, and to experience what brings others joy and energy. And that can add to our own deeper understanding of the world. Today's podcast is a story about how a grant provided educators to do just that. Explore a deeper understanding of the world by going to a region in the Ivory Coast, a French-speaking country of 33 million in West Africa. Their project was to create quality teacher resources to be shared with French teachers. But the stories they heard and the experiences they lived provided them far more than they dreamed. Language does that. As you listen, think of your own life. What roles have language and culture played in making you a resource for a world of increased understanding? Enjoy the podcast. Well, it is my great pleasure to welcome Jessica, Jeff, Megan, and Steve to the podcast today. Welcome, everyone, and I'm delighted to have you here to talk about your adventure. Steve, why don't you start us off by introducing yourself and telling an overview of what it is that has happened that has brought you guys here on the podcast today.
Okay. Hi, my name is Steve Sacco, and I'm a professor emeritus of French and Italian at San Diego State University, and also have my own consulting company. And 3 years ago, I approached Megan about working together to write grant proposals for the AATF. And out of 3 proposals, this one was funded. And this is the one that really was important to us because we wanted the opportunity to create materials that would be available to students and teachers worldwide that focus on Francophone Africa and the French language used in the context of that continent, because French is the most widely spoken European language in Africa. And Africa right now is on its way to become the new China. So more and more our students in French are going to need to think in terms of possibly working for companies in Francophone Africa.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that. And Megan, would you introduce yourself and how you are engaged with this project?
Sure. My name is Megan Diercks, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Association of Teachers of French, or AATF. And like Steve said, about 3 years ago, he approached me about writing some grants, and I said, I'm a little busy, maybe later. And he said, no, we have to do this. And he was right. We had to do this. And so our proposal was to take a team of French teachers and curriculum writers to Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa and give them some freedom to explore different topics and create curricular units that we can then polish and put on the AATF website free of charge and available to everyone. And this was really something that spoke to my heart, because there are a lot of French teachers that are very comfortable teaching France, they're comfortable teaching Quebec, Belgium fine, Switzerland fine, but Francophone Africa is really tricky. Not a lot of teachers have the resources to go. They don't really know what to do. They either go as a tourist, but they don't really learn in depth like we had the opportunity to do. And so being able to assemble this absolutely magnificent team of educators, it was just a unicorn team. They all got along the whole time. It was amazing. And to have them go and be able to explore the topics that were of interest to them and then create units or activities based on that. It was a really special experience. And I came out at the end and just had a great time meeting everyone and seeing what they had learned in country, and then being able myself to experience some of the richness of this little known in America country.
Very exciting concept. And just so imaginative in realization. Jessica, would you introduce yourself and what role have you played in this adventure?
So I'm Jessica Ayer. I'm a French teacher. I also teach Spanish sometimes to maintain my full-time status. I teach in a small town in Lunenburg, Massachusetts, which is about an hour from Boston. And I am the only French teacher, so I do all the levels. And I was moved to do this kind of work in general because over the years, and certainly more in the last few years, I've had a lot of students who have come from African countries, or their parents come from an African French-speaking country, or from the Caribbean area. I have students from Haiti who have moved to the United States, and focusing on France is a disservice and is to them. They need to see themselves in the curriculum. And this has just been something I've been trying to do for many years, and it's a lifelong journey because I can't know everything about all these places. And I'm in a doctoral program at the University of Florida in curriculum and instruction. And one of the really big shift for me that I've learned in that program is that there's celebratory multiculturalism, and then there's looking at the world through an anti-oppressive lens while honoring and celebrating the cultures and communities in those locations, but also being certain to name the colonial legacy that persists, and how, doing both at the same time, so that we're not just presenting to students an idealistic world of harmony, of ethnic diversity throughout the world, and of the French-speaking world where everyone is very happy to be in that situation. We have a lot of changes happening with France being kicked out of militarily in Africa. We have French being removed as an official language from Mali, and being able to make sure we address that when we're telling our students, so that we're not presenting French as this this language that everyone has peacefully accepted. And so that was my motivation for traveling to the Côte d'Ivoire. How can I teach students about a continuing colonial legacy that exists in Côte d'Ivoire, and yet at the same time not present this as a sad story, but throughout, but to celebrate their identity as they see themselves, as best that I can as an outsider.
Jessica, thank you so much. I really appreciate the depth with which you have shared that notion of making sure that the celebratory is balanced with the reality of some of the experiences of the post-colonial experience. Thank you very much. Jeff, would you introduce yourself and let us know what it is that you did in this amazing project?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Loughary, and I teach French at Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. I also work with teacher certification candidates in the education program, and I'm the dual credit liaison for high school teachers across the state. And I've just finished a 2-year term as president of the Foreign Language Association of Missouri. So now I'll be the advocacy chair and past president for the next 2 years. I am also a PhD candidate at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where I am focusing on applied linguistics and specifically linguistic human rights. And so when this project came to light and I heard about the application, I knew I had to apply. I've never been to Africa. I was dying to go. And my main purpose was to meet real people and bring back real stories for my students to enhance the curriculum that we have so that we can branch beyond what draws our students to the French program, which is, of course, Paris and the Eiffel Tower. And we want to move beyond that to include other areas of Francophone world. And so my participation was just a really beneficial thing for me personally, but also for the French program at my university.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate that. And one of the things that you were mentioned there, Jeff, is the idea of real stories. Real stories. Do you have a particular real story or two that you're like, and that's one of those things I was looking for? I'm so glad I'm here.
Yes, I had the opportunity to talk with many real people. And of course, we started with our English partners at the university where we were based. And we made a lot of real friendships with people and connections that I think will carry on into the future. And I think one of the turning points for me was a small time where a man took me by the hand, which surprised me. I learned later that that's a very cultural thing, but he took me by the hand and he sat me down on a bench and just started asking me very sincere questions about how Americans view Africans, and what the stereotypes that I had heard were. He wanted to know how we could break those stereotypes down, and also how to encourage Americans to have a real and authentic view of Africans. And so for me, that was a really special moment, because the questions he asked me were very unexpected. And when I tell my students about that conversation, they of course have their own questions. And so the story continues on both sides of the ocean. And so that for me is a really very special connection.
That is beautifully said. And I have so many interesting follow-up questions, I think, from that. Jessica, though, I want to turn to you at did you like, oh, now this is one of those stories that I definitely am going to be here for and taking home?
So there are so many. So I didn't actually state what my focus of my unit was when I was there. It was on the cacao industry. And I was sort of like always the person when anyone brought up cacao, it was like, where's Jessica? Where's Jessica? And we were able to visit a plantation and see how cacao is harvested, which in itself is a wonderful experience for students to see, and they're going to see videos of me and my colleagues that were in Côte d'Ivoire, really participating in that process and learning how to do that, because we so often are divorced from our food, where we don't even know where it comes from. So that in itself is an incredible lesson. But then I also interviewed a person whose grandfather owned a plantation. So he grew up on a cacao plantation. And this is probably one of the most moving moments, I would say, of the trip for me, as it was towards the end as well. He talked about the pride that he felt when he knew that he was the one that had planted one of those cacao trees, and watching it and weeding it and caring for it, and how not only did he feel pride, but he felt that his parents were proud of him for being a good worker and for participating in that. He was not, and I want to make sure I state, he was not a child laborer. It was an afternoon fun event. He was very clear that he did not, he couldn't carry the pods because they would be too heavy, and there's certain activities that he wasn't allowed to do because it was too dangerous. But it was just a moment of happiness and joy for him, and for students to see that this is something that is that they make a living doing this, and that they are proud of the work that they do and what they produce. There's other pieces to it that we get into, which is how much profit are these planters making from the chocolate bar that you're eating, which is unfortunately pennies, and we get into that too. But being able to film someone who actually tells the story of working in the plantation and hearing music and dancing, and that it just brings it to life. And yeah, that was a very moving moment for me.
Wonderful, and I can see in watching you as you tell that story how moving it is. As I move forward with asking some more questions about some of the items that you have talked about here and your relationships in particular, I'd like to turn to Megan and Steve and say, can you make sure that our listeners understand what resources you were looking for them to come back with, and how these experiences and stories fit in to the resources that were decided on, and how they were assembled, created, and how they're being used?
So the resources are still in the process of being created, and then they'll be proofread and then posted on the AATF website. But it was really up to each team member to pick a focus that was of interest to them. So Jessica was cacao, Jeff was slang, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So each participant could choose what they wanted to do and then create either a unit, or there were a couple of people who created some add-on activities for different typical high school French units, some activities to go with food. So if you didn't want to revamp an entire one of your curricular units, but just supplement it with some special Côte d'Ivoire focused activities and information, then those will be available as well. But we're looking at videos and IPAs and other curricular resources, and those will be available on the AATF website. And we have a special category in our store called resources, and those will be available free of charge to everyone. So you don't have to be an AATF member in order to access these resources. But once they all come in and are proofread, then I'll have a better handle on what they will be. But they will be robust and they will be accurate because they were created by this team who actually lived these experiences and did research while in the country.
Thank you for that clarity. Appreciate it very much. And when I turn back to you, Jessica and Jeff, when you were taking a look at these resources and building them with your team, did you find that you had to pivot a little bit based on the experiences that you had, or that there was content or anything else that you would address that was like, we weren't planning on this, but this clearly needs to be part of what we accomplish?
Jeff, do you want to start with that? Or
Sure, I'll jump in. I definitely had to pivot on my project. My original plan had been to focus on the regional languages, and we all were given the opportunity to have a Bambara class every morning, and that was very beneficial. It put us back into the mindset of a student learning a language with fresh eyes and complete confusion. And it was a very uncomfortable experience, of course, but it was very real, and it brought back a lot of memories of when we first started learning, French or other languages. And so my original plan had been to focus on all of the regional languages that were there, and I had this beautiful plan to find authentic resources, and we were going to go to the bookstores and find these stories that were written in Bambara and Baoulé. And the reality was that there were only 3 bookstores listed in the whole city of San Pedro, where we were based, and 2 of them were closed permanently, and the third was nothing more than a warehouse with 1 table or maybe 2 tables of books, and most of them were actually from France. And so there wasn't much that I could do with that project. So therefore I pivoted to slang, and the slang that's very common in Côte d'Ivoire is called Nuchi. And so we heard some slang. We heard it on TV, on the radio, and we also heard it in the marketplace. And of course, with our English partners, they would tell us different words and phrases. And so my project morphed into more of an IPA based on slang. And so my project then helps American French students see how their language use changes based on who they're talking to, and how all cultures incorporate slang at different levels of society, and how we have very little control over how languages change. We are part of that change, but we really just kind of move along with it. And so my project turned from, again, regional languages to slang that is more universal. And it was really an interesting pivot for me because I was not expecting.
That's great.
Can I mention a pivot too?
Of course, Steve.
So my pivot was, first of all, we had a curriculum, for the Department of Ed, they want to see everything from day 1 to day 28, every hour on the hour, which is always a nightmare. So as we would go along, people would say, I need more of this. I need for us to pivot so we can study this or that. So they might bring it up in class, or they came individually to me. And then my job was to go to my counterpart at the University of San Pedro and to see if there was an expert who would be able to speak about that so that we could make some of these pivots. So if you look at what our daily schedule ended up being, is probably maybe a 20% overlap, because all the changes that the scholars needed in order to do their projects. So that was my job, is to get them what they needed and stay out of the way.
That's really neat that you had that, or you made a great effort to make sure that flexibility was part of the whole experience so that it could move forward effectively where you really were. Jessica, how about you? Did you see a pivot?
So as I said, I hyper focused on cacao, and but I think my pivot was in the beginning because it became apparent after about a week that that finding someone who was an expert in the cacao industry was going to be very challenging. And so I started doing a lot of research on my own, and I used guidebooks, like who are there tour guides in San Pedro, and and this is very interesting because I think this was also another theme of our stay there, which is you can just be walking down the street and stumble upon something incredible happening that just moves you to tears. Just like there are events like that happen all the time, just incredible kindness of people. Anyway, I called a hotel in San Pedro that had a concierge and said, do you know of anyone that does cacao tours? And they gave me the name of a gentleman. And so then I talked to one of the professors in one of our classes, Dr. Bissou, who everyone recalls. And he knew the name of the tour guide whose name I had written down. And the second I showed him the name, he's like, oh yeah, I even have his phone number. And he just dials them up, and he calls him right there when I brought it up to him. And they have a conversation, and he's like, okay, he's going to get back to me in 2 days. And then that weekend, we visited a cacao plantation. Just put the whole trip together like that in days time, And so I think, my pivot was like, I was feeling as if all was lost, and this cacao unit I had dreamed of was going to fall apart. And then suddenly I had more information that I could possibly use, So, and there are many instances like that, I think, over the month-long stay.
One of the things that's really over and over you are demonstrating to me, my friends, is that language is not this kind of thing that you just go from point A to point B and you say point A to point B and you keep going like this, but it's those serendipitous moments, those cultural moments, those stories of integrity and of interaction. And you have resources. The point of your being there was to create these resources and to have your experiences, yes. But when you come back, as you have, you've got those resources, how are you helping to incorporate these small experiences that are not part of the resource per se, but are part of the experience of living in a language in the world? What are you doing for that? And not only for yourself, potentially, if you can say this, but how might you be capturing this not only for your students, but for others that might need to hear what you have experienced and what it means?
So I'll jump in here. I think for me, it's just the memories that come back naturally when I'm talking to someone, whether it's my colleagues or my students or my family or just even, strangers in a restaurant when we're just sitting there waiting for a table. I think just being able to explain where I've been, what I've done, brings back new memories through the questions that people ask me. And so I think those small moments, they just kind of pop up at different times, and they always bring to mind a different memory, a different experience that I had while I was in Côte d'Ivoire. And I think that for me has been the most valuable part of actually traveling, and that was what made it worth it. It was definitely a long journey to get from here to there, even though I show my students on the globe, and we hold the globe in my classroom frequently, that it's not a long distance, but it does take a lot of effort to get there. It's not a smooth journey. So I think it was worth going there in person to meet real people, have those experiences, and then come back and then wait for the questions that people have, because people have very odd questions sometimes. Like, why would you go to Africa? Isn't it dangerous? Do they, what is it like? Is everybody poor? And they would ask me questions, and I can break down those stereotypes through the spontaneous conversations that happen in the hallway, that happen on the sidewalk, that happen in a restaurant or around town. And I really appreciate those experiences and the opportunity to share.
For me, having knowledge of something that you've read in a book, it just is different when you are able to speak to a person and hear them articulate that knowledge through their own experience. And it's so powerful. For me, the trip shifted my entire view of the world and how the economy functions. And in one of my interviews, this was with two of the employees of the hotel that we stayed at, which was on the university campus. And I asked the two employees, do you eat chocolate? And they both said no. Because, maybe once a year, or maybe because it's so expensive. And then I said, well, what role do you think that plays in society, in your society? Because obviously you produce the cacao, but what role does that play if you're not eating it? And they both just said, that's like, that's something for rich people. Like, that's just something for, and they said white people. That's not, like, we don't eat that. And then I said, if it were cheaper, would you eat it? And one of them said yes, but the other one said, and this is another one of those incredible moments, and I can't wait to show my students this interview. She said, if it were produced in Africa, if the chocolate were made here and the profits from that factory were going back to Africans, she's like, I don't even like chocolate, but I would eat so much chocolate if it were produced here. And you could see that she would be so proud of that product if it were produced here. And I can read about that, the Côte d'Ivoirians don't eat much chocolate. I can look at infographics, but to hear those words from her mouth does something really deep inside of a person for me. And I hope that that's what it does for other people when they see that interview.
Certainly did it for me right here. The Côte d'Ivoire dream, like an American dream, is a dream of people for their country. Thank you very much for sharing that wonderful story.
I'd like to circle back to something that Jessica said and also answer the question, I think, hopefully at the same time. But when Jessica said that she wants for all of her students to see themselves in a Francophone culture, that's one of the goals of the AATF. And there's been a huge movement to decolonize your curriculum and, like Jessica said, treat that whole heritage very sensitively but truthfully as well. And so it's one thing for the AATF to say decolonize your curriculum and we're all about la francophonie. But to me, this trip was really putting my money where my mouth is. I can say that all day as one of the leaders of the AATF, but this actually is follow-up where we put people in country to create authentic materials, because this is important to our organization and it's important to all French teachers and your students, member or not. I don't care. Well, I'd like for you to be a member. I do care. But if you're not a member, you still deserve to have this accurate view of an incredible culture that you can share with your students. So it was an amazing experience. I'd always wanted to go to Africa. Côte d'Ivoire was not ever my first choice of country. I never thought that would be my first real African country, a layover in Morocco, but I didn't think that it would be. But I wouldn't have traded this experience or anybody on our team for anything.
What a beautiful, passionate statement. And I'm actually going to ask you, Megan, here you have this wonderful project that has taken place in the Côte d'Ivoire. And I'm also looking at Steve, I guess, at the same time here, is what vision do you have? You clearly stated it for what the purpose and the impact of the resources are right now. Any vision to bring in more of the cultures and thus demonstrating the variety within Africa?
Well, Megan and I wrote another proposal, still for Ivory Coast, but to develop a French for specific purpose programs across the AATF. But the AATF is also built in to a grant that we're doing right now where I want to and I think Megan's going to like this, to be able to invite Megan to whatever Francophone African country she wants to visit as a part of setting up possible exchanges and future, if it can't be Fulbright-Hays because the program's been cut by the current administration, but to find other ways of doing what we did with other kinds of monies that Megan would be able, as the head of the AATF, to go to Tunisia, to go to Morocco, to Senegal, and Cameroon, other countries, to be able to scout around, to see where we can have exchanges, and also where we can do a next non-Fulbright-Hays, since the program doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you, Steve. That's very, very helpful clarification of what some of the intentionalities are.
It was a really wonderful program, and we would definitely love to do it again. It's a lot of work, and I think the next time around I'll know better what I'm getting into and what needs to happen. You don't know what you don't know until you realize that you don't know it. So it will be different and better the next time around. But this is a priority for us, and we are looking at ways to continue to incorporate La Francophonie into our resources and into a lot of what the AATF does.
The program is a great weight loss tool. I mean, Megan and I heard on August 7th of last year, and we were still going till like December 1st. I've lost 51 pounds total because of all the worrying and all the something waking up you up in the middle of the night. Have you thought about this in case this were to happen? So we can recommend Fulbright-Hays or something similar as a weight loss program for the co-directors. Not that Megan needs, Megan doesn't need to lose weight. But
another good reason to reconsider the defunding of the Fulbright-Hays experience. No question about that. So I'm going to turn over to Jessica and Jeff here for the final part. You are looking at your own experiences of what you have had and what kind of impact it's having right now in your lives, along with what it is that you want to be able to do personally. If you turn to my audience and say, and here's what I would ask you listeners to think about, do, prepare for, however you want to put it, I would love for you to give some final words here today about what difference this is making for you and what it should be doing in the world. Who'd like to start? Jeff?
Okay, yeah, I would say what I would say to your listeners is to take every opportunity to travel. When the opportunity came up for me to join this program, I was very excited because it's very unlikely that I would be able to do this on my own. I certainly would not have had the same experience where we were living on campus and we had English partners and an opportunity to make friends. I think if you organize a trip like this on your own, the experience is very different. But that said, I think that every opportunity to travel is important. It pulls us out of our home. It pulls us out of what is comfortable to us. And it opens our eyes to different perspectives, different languages. I mean, Jessica and I and everyone, I think, on this trip, we learned things that we were not expecting. Many of us didn't know what to expect when we were at the airport. We were meeting each other for the first time. We didn't know really where we were going, how we were really going to get there. We knew that things had been planned out, but there were a lot of surprises along the way. And I think for your listeners, it's important to remember that any opportunity you get to travel and experience something new is very valuable, even though you might not have it fully planned out.
Thank you, Jeff. Very insightful, and I sure hope people will take advantage of your good advice. Jessica?
I agree 100% with what Jeff just stated, and I think in my little town, I'll say in Lunenburg, one of the things I tell my students is how important it is to leave, like go someplace else, live somewhere else, even within the United States, to know how other people live and how other people see the world. And going to another country and speaking the language, I mean, that's the key right there. Is you have to speak the language, and it's not to dissuade people, but to encourage them to attempt to learn and just watch when you try to speak it, how a person reacts differently. I'll give the example of us having learned Bambara. We were in the market after having learned some great phrases in terms of like negotiation. I said one of the phrases when I was negotiating, and the gentleman just lit up. Like, his whole demeanor changed, and I think I had a connection with him much more so than I did before I had said that word in Bambara, because I'm attempting to know him. I can't know him perfectly, but I'm showing a vulnerability because I don't speak it well, and I'm trying. And I think showing that vulnerability to someone from another culture, especially when you're in their culture, is going to open up all sorts of opportunities, all sorts of experiences that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And it is scary to do that because you're going to mess up. But it's through those experiences that you grow. And I think for me personally, and hopefully for many, many other people, but when you travel and you do something like what we did, you come back changed. You experience something that shifts how you see the world, and that becomes sort of a part of who you are, and hopefully an improved version sort of yourself. And I think that's what I could hope for everyone, is that through traveling, through learning languages and other cultures, that they learn more about themselves, and maybe even it shifts a little bit of who they are when they see how others see the world.
Thank you, Jessica. Beautifully said. My friends, I thank you so much. This conversation has flown by, and there's just so much that you are sharing and will share. I look forward to keeping up with these resources, and look forward to what you will continue to share in the world. Thanks for being my guest today, and thanks for encouraging the listeners to be out there and be vulnerable and be changed. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to these stories today. I look forward to hearing yours. Connect up with me and with my community on my website, fluency.consulting, to hear more language and culture stories and to share your own. Let's open hearts and lives through language together. Until next time.